Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya and welcome to TFR Newsroom. And today we have with us once again Michel Tricot, co-founder and CEO of Airbyte. Michel, it's great to have you on the show again.
Thank you, Swapnil. It's great to be there.
If you look at Airbyte, you folks are going through the same kind of soul searching or looking at the business model that many other open source companies are going through in this cloud first. Everything is as a service word, because what is happening is that build pairs can come in, take your code, start offering your product as a service. And looking at the scale that they operate, there is just no way you can compete with them. It's not the same old Linux world where Red Hat, SUSE, Canonical, and Oracle can fight there. So it's not an even playing field. The rules have changed, and sometimes I feel, and I may be wrong, if you look at licenses, they evolve over time. But I feel that even the most popular open source licenses, or if you look at two bodies, FSF or OSI, they kind of failed to come up with the version of license that protects creators in this cloud world. Of course, FSF came up with GPL version 3, but the idea was dualization, where you can put everything else. But when I look at a lot of licenses, they seem to protect the end user that, hey, I should be able to do everything that I want to do with this code, and not that much about the creator of that product or project. So that has always been there. If I ask you from Airbyte's perspective, how do you feel that, we do know that it becomes tricky to run any business, let alone it's an open source business. But if I ask you, what kind of push did you feel that you're like, hey, no, we need to change the license? So I gave you a very broad picture because there are so many moving parts. There is not just one aspect there.
When we think about open source and licenses, there are two things that we need to keep in mind. First one is we are building a project for our community. We want to have this adoption and we're creating this standard for data integration. And on the other end, we want to make sure that we are also building a sustainable business so that all the revenue that we get, we can reinject it into our community and into building the product and making the product better. So you have to find the balance with the license. When we released Airbyte, everything is MIT. That is great, like massive adoption. But we also want to make sure that people can continue to use Airbyte the way they've done. And we just want to protect ourselves against very, very specific use cases. And the only thing we want to do is make sure that nobody can resell Airbyte. But we want to make sure that everybody who is building a product on top of Airbyte, who is leveraging Airbyte internally for data analytics, should be able to continue to do it. And when we were thinking about licenses, we looked at the project and looked at the two pieces that exist. First one is the standard that we're creating, which is the data protocol and the connectors on top of it. Our mission is really about communitizing data integration and all the tooling around that. This has to remain MIT. We want that to remain MIT because we are creating a standard for exchanging data. And we want to make sure that everybody can use that freely forever. Now, the other piece is more around like the glue between these connectors. And the glue between these connectors is basically what we are basing our commercial offering on. And we want to make sure that people can continue to use it. You should be able to integrate it into your product. And at that point, that's the piece we want to make sure people cannot just take it and resell it. And that goes also with our long-term strategy about how do we maintain the long tail of connectors, because it's a very, very hard job. You can build a connector, it's going to work. 3 months down the line, it's going to fail because the external system is broken. And you will need to have the community to continue to help on on this maintenance. And one thing that we want to do in the future is to actually share the revenue that the Airbyte cloud platform is making with the contributors of these connectors. And that is one reason why we need to make sure that we secure Airbyte cloud and make sure that this is the only place where you can monetize this type of connectors.
Right. There's so much to unpack there. Number one is that this is not something new. We have seen in old days, Qt used to have dual licenses. Java used to have dual licenses because they had to maintain and manage that. But they were very clear about it. Here, what I see is that at one point you're saying that you do need MIT license because you want community support, community contribution. At the same time, you want to protect your business as well. Where I see a bit of a conflict there, because a lot of companies who have built their businesses, they consume a lot of open source, and if that code was released under a license where you can now repackage it or resell it, those companies would not exist. That totally kind of voids the idea of open source. The idea of open source, all the way from MIT to Apache to FSF to OSI, is that a user can do anything with the code. Plus, I was talking to Linus Torvalds earlier, and I was like, why did you settle down with GNU GPL version 2? He said, even Linux in the early days, they used a lot of licenses. They tried to create their own licenses. But the problem was that you did not even know whether two licenses are compatible or not. So when you spin your own license, and then, of course, the way we live in this world, there are different licenses. They may not even be compatible. So did you look at other options also, other models as well, before using the Elastic version 2?
We've looked at other models, and what we thought was a lot of the other licenses are very restrictive in what you can do. The Elastic license is the one that is the most permissive. It just focuses on one single use case that is not really possible, which is the reselling of the application. But everything else you can continue to do. You can modify the code. You can distribute the code. You can create a product on top of it, but you cannot just resell Airbyte as an open source, like as a project. And that's the only thing we want to make sure. I mean, if people want to expose Airbyte for free, they can do it. If they want to use it in their product, they can do it, but not reselling. And that's why, like, this license to us was the most permissive. We've talked a lot with our community to ensure that that basically we would not be breaking how they were using Airbyte by changing the license. And we tried a few of them. We tried some polyform licenses, which are good, but not for what we wanted to do in our long-term strategy for Airbyte. What we want is, we are creating a standard, so we want to make sure that people use us as much as they can, with only one restriction.
What is stopping any bit cloud vendor to still take Airbyte and offer it as a free service?
Yeah, so there are a few reasons. The first one is, there is actually one main reason, which is connectors. It's up to the contributor to decide what license they want to use. Today, we encourage people to use MIT, but the day these vendors or agencies or individual contributors are starting to make revenue out of these connectors, they might want to decide to protect themselves and protect their revenue stream from other company that might want to use this connector for free. So at that point, it's going to be up to our community to decide what they want to do to protect their project and to protect the connectors that they are building.
Would it be easy to just go proprietary way and say, you know what, the source code is available? Because every time I talk to folks, and I had actually a show with Dirk Honda from VMware, he's chief open source officer there, and he was like, just either call it proprietary software or open source. But when you say open source, it should be very, very clear that I should be able to do anything with that. So why you did not choose, there is nothing wrong. Apple is proprietary. Actually, in most cases, proprietary software is very clear. You do know you cannot do a lot of things, but when you allow them to do things, they're happy with that. So why to choose the mid path when you do want to restrict a lot of things?
Yeah, I think it's we're creating a standard. We want to access data in every single silo where it's available. And if we start having either closed source or just source available software for that, that will be a hindrance to the community adopting and wanting to contribute to the project to build these connectors and have access to the data. And there is a long tail. You have tens of thousands of different connectors that needs to be built. If we put limitation around who can contribute, how we can contribute, that will hurt Airbyte on the long term and on the creation of the standard. So it's a balance. It's a balancing act where we are creating a standard, but we also want to make sure that we are making the revenue that allow us to power that standard.
If you look at this, and you are not alone here, Do you see some consolidation will happen eventually where a lot of players who are getting burnt will realize, I mean, there is some efforts going on there and which is not being met very welcoming hard from larger open source communities. But do you see that at some point the larger ecosystem will acknowledge this problem and will start to listen to startups and smaller companies also and come up with the standardized another standard, another license that will kind of protect them in this cloud native clouds first everything as a service world?
Yeah, and I think that's probably why today it's hard to find exactly the license that you need, and you need to really be inventive. It's like we are innovate. I mean, the world is changing around cloud, around how like open source projects make their way into cloud. Is we're in a new world, so we have a need to innovate about how we think about building a business and at the same time giving back to the community and ensuring that they have access to the best of breed. So I'm sure that we will see a lot more license and a lot more like open source project doing similar move in the future. It's just we are like these projects are going to start converging to a license that works extremely well for both the community and for them to build a sustainable company. And like the Elastic Search, the Elastic license is actually a very good step in that direction, in a sense that it keeps a lot of freedom for everybody, and it just limits and protects the project and the company against one very like hostile type of behavior.
I will go back to the point of contributors. In most cases, a lot of these contributors, the fact is that unlike some desktop centric or consumer centric projects where end users like people like me will go and send a patch and do that, in most these cases contributors are either your users or players who are packaging that as a service or a product. When you change a license, sometimes contributors feel betrayed that suddenly you pull the rug from underneath their feet. You said that the feedback was positive, but you do realize that there are such cases as well. So, what do you have to say to the contributors?
So, I mean, the thing I want to tell contributors is, first of all, everything that like most of our contribution go on the connector side, and this is not something we've changed. You can if you want to use the connector outside of Airbyte, you still can. And but what we've said is what we've done is we've really taken a license that is extremely favorable for everybody, while making sure that, and that's why we didn't go full license on the whole project. That I don't think that would have been a positive move, and we just selected with a lot of attention which pieces we were changing. So they won't see a change. Like we made sure that we are only targeting one thing, and the rest people can continue to use, can continue to. They can even contribute to the core platform, the thing that has changed the license. That doesn't matter. Like it is still a very, very permissive license. So, and for where we get most of our contribution, nothing's changed for contributors.
Right. So anything that is sitting on top of connectors, that's where you have changed the license. And if it might, sometimes people get obsessed with that. But even if you look at the Linux kernel or if you look at Kubernetes, a majority of contributions are coming for the edge of other pieces. Not everybody is contributing. So sometimes it also matters that which piece you're consuming or which piece you are getting involved with. So that also plays with. So thanks for clarifying that, because people get obsessed with the whole picture, but they forget about their different components where people are plugging into, or that those are the components they're consuming. Now, are you worried about any kind of pushback?
Not really. Maybe one or two people, but I don't think that that we will get any feedback and any pushback. And that's really that. It's really we've really put a lot of attention. We've talked with a lot of members from the community, like our highest contributors, to make sure that, and our highest user, to make sure that from their perspective, how would that affect their their perception of Airbyte, and would that prevent them from using Airbyte? And that was a green light all along the way. So maybe maybe not. I think we've made a good choice with that license in the sense that it's extremely permissive.
What I hear from you, and I feel that that you're telling, the reality is that these changes are not coming purely from Airbyte, but you had a lot of discussion, a lot of engagement with the contributors, core contributors, and you work with them, because the fact is that the project will not survive without contributors too. Yes, you need business, but you also need a community around it. So I hear that you work with contributors. So if I ask you, after this change, what kind of changes do you expect in the community around Airbyte, or what kind of changes you would want there?
I'm going to split the community in two. First one is users. I don't think anything is going to change for our user community. And for our contributor community, I mean, there are some logistical things, like we have a CLA now, but beside that, it's coding as usual. It's a contribution as usual. So unless they are, for some reason, they really don't like this idea of having a non MIT core part of the project, nothing really changes. So I don't expect any changes in behavior. And actually, the story behind how we want to think about our revenue model in the future with the contributor, I think is going to have is going to get a lot of traction around the months as we're making that model more real and start engaging more with contributor to share revenues.
What business decision or what drove you to change this license model?
Yeah. So today, when you look at what the different companies in the industry support in terms of number of connectors, we're at like 150 connectors. That's the standard. Today, we're at 120 connectors. That's what we've built over the past year. Our goal is to be at 200 at the end of the year, and our goal is to be at 1,000 in 2022. And you cannot just fuel this growth. We need to be able to support this growth. And that comes from, and that was one of the reasons why we are doing this license transition. We want to make sure that we have everything that we need. We can put these connectors in the right place in Airbyte Cloud, so that we can start doing revenue sharing with community. We can start incentivize community member to help on the maintenance of this long tail of connectors, because this is extremely hard. Yeah, and we're going to have more than 1,000. We're going to have a lot more. You have data everywhere, so the scale is enormous.
As we were talking earlier, and you mentioned that this license change kind of came through a lot of discussions with the community, or in a way, not directly from the community, but through all those discussions. And we also talked about that. How do you want to ensure that the community does not feel betrayed? You mentioned that there are not just one community, there are communities around Airbytes. You also mentioned that you are also working on some model to share revenue. And I also heard the term was participative model. So can you talk about how are you planning to, first of all, help community grow, also so that they maintain that confidence and trust in Airbyte and they grow with your growth?
When you're looking at the long tail of connectors, you have a ton. And what the risk that can happen is that someone contributes to a connector, forgets about it, it works for a few months, and then it stops working. And so what we want to introduce is what we call the participative model, which is how can we, when this connector becomes part of the cloud platform, how can we share the revenue in exchange from the community or from the maintainer of that connectors for some SLA, like bug fixes, feature adds, and creating this very deep partnership with, whether it's an individual contributor, whether it's a vendor, whether it's an agency, like how do we create a positive incentive that helps not just this company, but also the whole community to have access to very high quality with very good SLA connectors. And that is the whole idea behind that. That's the idea behind the licenses. We want to make sure we protect this revenue so that we can feed it back into the community and ensure this high quality coverage of connectors.
So there, you're kind of hitting a lot of birds with one stone. First of all, you're trying to kind of eliminate any zombie connectors there because that becomes a big problem. And you're also adding incentives for those creators so that they can get incentive. And that also helps Airbyte because you don't have zombie connectors. So you're kind of hitting a lot of birds with that one stone. Michel, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about a bit of a challenging topic today, because talking about licenses in the open source world becomes challenging. But thanks for first of all clarifying why you are doing it. And I think most companies today feel this pain, but they really don't know which direction to go. So maybe these changes will encourage them. And also, as we discussed, that eventually we may have a standardized solution to this problem, so the companies won't have to come up and scratch their own itch every single time. So thanks for sharing those insights, and I will look forward to talk to you again, of course, to understand the model that you're working on, and of course to talk more about the cloud that you're planning. So thanks for your time today, and I look forward to talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.